Also, hi.
Hi. How have you been?
Hey, save it for the show.
Yeah.
So, Patrick, who the hell are you?
Well, I'm Patrick. I'm a product designer. I've been one for about 14, 15 years now. And most of my career, I worked in early phase startups. Some of those were venture backed, some were totally bootstrapped, some scaled, some didn't, some were sold. And then I eventually moved on to work at more medium sized to larger companies because I wanted to understand, what that was like working at scale. And that's me.
The fastest introduction ever.
Too much? Too little?
No, it's more like it's either too little or you know yourself really well, and everyone else is just like, well, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Like if I was introducing myself, I'd be like, I don't know. I make things good. Debatable, but
Yeah.
yeah, I still don't know how to talk about this stuff.
I could take another take, a little bit more detailed one. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Let's do it.
Oh, fuck. So, Patrick, who the hell are you?
Well, Matthew, I'm Patrick. I'm a product designer.
Not this shit again. Oh, God.
All right. Take two here. Well, I'm a product designer. I've been working, mostly worked in early phase startups for most of my 20s. A lot of ed tech startups, some SaaS startups, business intelligence. From that experience in business intelligence, I tend to really try to lean on connecting what I'm doing as a product designer with the actual business strategy and the various levers that are kind of in place there. Beyond that, I also work at a larger, kind of medium, larger enterprise company on their search engine and as well as their kind of discovery and navigation behaviors.
Not to be named.
Yeah.
Got it.
Should it be named? I don't know.
No. I mean, whatever. It's not like anybody's going to watch this stuff anyway. No, I'm kidding. It's literally high single digits subscribing right now. So
Yeah.
it's we're off to a good start. I guess like one of the things that I've always two things from your introduction.
Yep.
I can form a sentence still. The comparison between the startup land and the mid-sized company, not the differences, but what do you find is the same no matter what size you end up or that you've worked in?
I think it's one of the big things that comes to mind is managing stakeholders. I got a startup. You're going to have pretty much direct contact, with the product leader, probably the CEO, any subject matter experts at the company for the problem space. So especially if it's ed tech, maybe someone who specializes in a certain subject area in higher ed or a subject area in technology. And there you get direct access. There's not a lot of in between you and the stakeholders. But as far as at a bigger company, it's the same thing, but you have to realize the different layers of people and some of how they're being influenced in the company. But at a high level, it's still about managing those relationships and creating alignment and all that good stuff.
Do you find this is a terrible interview question because it's a closed question, but do you find it easier, harder to manage that with more direct access or less direct access?
Yeah, each have their trade-offs. I think with direct access in a startup where there's not tons of layers between you and the leadership. Um, it's tough to sometimes influence how they're thinking about a problem or even the solution that they have in mind. And part of that is it's somewhat justified because um, founders and leaders in that space, they've usually lived and breathed a certain problem space long before you're brought on board. Um, but other times it's not justified, right? And you need to, poke at some of those assumptions that they're making. Um, but that can be a little bit more contentious, like direct, contentious, and tough to manage. Whereas in a larger organization, it's uh, it's kind of all about understanding what their priorities are, what their incentives are, and understanding the different layers, who's related to who, and all that stuff, and really kind of thinking about what is their actual stake in the game. Are they just trying to ship something because they have to meet their OKRs, or are you able to get them to slow down and think more holistically? And if they need to slow down, who else do you need to talk to? Do you need to talk to their boss to let them know what's going on? And how do you do that in a way that's not not to throw them under the bus, right? It's more to, hey, we need to slow this down so we actually deliver something better. And there's a lot of assumptions we need to kind of unpack.
Yeah, it feels like the what stake does somebody have in a decision being made or a thing getting done? And this is a duh statement, but the more people you add to the mix, the more spread out the stake becomes.
Yeah.
And I think it probably reaches a point where, generally speaking, nobody has a stake.
Yep.
They might have that little, like you mentioned, meet an OKR so they can get a meets expectation in their annual review or whatever. But beyond that, compare that to the CEO, CTO of a startup, huge stake in the decisions that they're trying to make, and also potentially less flexible in the direction they want to go.
Yep.
And on the other hand, you get people who are maybe more flexible, and that flexibility leads to decision loops.
Yeah.
Where no one really wants to make a decision.
Yeah. It's almost like grounding on the word stakeholder and stake. Uh, in larger organizations, forget what the actual stake is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many other processes, incentives in place. And if they're not really, really well designed, then that point to what's best for our user or customer, then a lot gets lost in translation.
Yeah, I was talking about this with a couple of the other people who I've interviewed on the show so far, and stakeholder management alignment is a common theme that I think continues to be like, for me, I know exactly what to do to manage stakeholders, alignment, all that stuff. Getting it done, it's just like, did we all want to go the same direction at the same time? Would that be good?
Right.
Like, you talk to people on the individual level, like, sometimes I've even asked that, or a form of that question specifically, and the answer is always yeah, we want to align. But then you get people in a group, and it's all of a sudden,
Yep.
maybe we could hold off from making that decision.
Right.
Because we haven't talked to this person who has nothing to do with what's going on.
Right. And that's kind of that's tough, especially when it's a real top down organization, where initiatives are like partly solutioned. It's hard to get product managers and product designers that have been trained to ask why to do something to actually go do it, or frankly, to do any activity that is in service of moving the needle in that direction for the initiative. And what do I mean by that? That's like, if we all disagree with it, great, with the direction, but we need to define the parts that we disagree with. What are the assumptions we disagree with? And we need to define those and frame those in a way where we can actually test those and then surface that data to leadership. And I think that last part is where a lot of PMs and designers are falling short. They kind of get disgruntled and they shrug their shoulders and say, oh, we're being told to do something, but they don't know how to go about maybe making their argument against it, right? They just think they're powerless in the situation. And I think really what's going on is leadership is asking them, hey, can you investigate this? That's really how you should take every top-down directive. And then ultimately, like, if you do all the investigation correctly, give them the data, and all the data is pointing to not doing the thing and they still want to do it, that's a whole other story. But yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your introduction about focusing on that business side. I guess that's something that I don't hear as often, although, maybe some people, and maybe this is an assumption on my part, but some people phrase it as strategy. And I don't know that necessarily those two are interchangeable.
Right.
Business and strategy. Maybe they are in some respects. But like, to me, having that understanding of the business side of things has always been something that has interested me more. And therefore, because it interests me, it's more important and everyone should care. But I'm wondering if, like, the attention you've put on that in your career, how has that made you a better designer? And maybe also how has it hindered progress for you?
Yeah, I think, like, initially in my career, it probably hindered me a bit in that I was always trying to kind of fit that square peg in a round hole as elegantly as possible. So what's the experience or interface that could support this business strategy? And then I think later in my career, it more felt like business initiatives were kind of the constraints you can put around your activities. So constraints can always be tested, right? Are these even the right constraints? But they help focus some of your activities. Like, if you're going to actively pursue pushing back against the business strategy, well, now that's a whole other different set of design activities. That's, asking, does the user even want an experience that looks like something that was just out of the box for this business strategy? And in that way, you're kind of testing the constraints of it. The other thing it does is it frames some of your activity around finding that overlap between what users want and what the business wants. So it's about, taking any knowledge you've built up of what, from all your user testing or discovery research, and pulling on certain strings there to figure out what might fit into this area, this overlap. And both are worthwhile activities to push back against the constraint, but also work within the constraint. Because I think both are going to reveal a lot of answers.
I think about this sometimes, and I really wonder the extent to which the profession would be different, the solutions that tech companies make would be different, if some of the design activities we do that relate to strategy and the business side of things were done before guesses were made.
Yeah.
And I know that that's an idealistic, imaginary place to live, but having been in it a couple of times, it's just so much easier to get buy-in when everybody has seen what it took to get to a decision to build something, versus that top-down approach of being handed a solution, or handed a desired outcome, I should say.
Well, that's the ideal, right? That's like how we, preferably a company is doing its buyer and market research, and then as well as its user research and behavioral research, and those things are kind of in lockstep with each other, and testing things early, and so yeah, that's the ideal for sure.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is design does not fit into agile development, though there are some design activities that do. But I think most of the design activities that are impactful can run similar to an agile sprint if you decide to structure it that way, but really just don't fit. And yet we keep trying to make it fit.
Yep. I agree with that.
And it doesn't.
Yeah, it's a nice framework, at least, to sort of scope our activities and have everyone understand what we're up to. But then it just creates siloing and fracturing unless someone or a team that actually has the power, is being effective at some of those cross-cutting collaborations and setting holistic journeys and all those things. It's like you can operate in agile, but then alongside it, you have to do all of your other separate work to drive more holistic design work.
Yeah. So I wonder, like, what have you changed in how you approach the work now that you're at where you're at, particularly around getting teams, getting groups, departments, companies, whatever level you want to work at, but getting them to care more about uncovering what the strategy should be. Like, how does that process work for you now? Like, what is your approach to it? And
I feel like it's always changing. Now it's like, looking back on some of the old big things that I worked on, I almost wish I had done even more detailed stakeholder mapping. So like, I've done it, but do it in a way where I'm actively researching what are their priorities, what are their incentives, because that's going to reveal a lot to me. It's going to tell me, do I need to talk to their manager as well to help the manager see why design needs to be involved here, what the timeline might be, all those things. I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, it's more just doing more of the same stuff, but really in a more nuanced way and understanding how the things you uncover will actually help you negotiate with stakeholders.
And what have you found to be, particularly within the design world, like people who have designer as a title or even researcher in that area, like helping them get from I don't feel like what I'm about to say is really digging on design systems, and I'm not, but a design systems approach to solving things versus the messier, ambiguous, let's see what's out there approach. Like, how have you seen, where you're at now, where you've been at before, particularly when you're working with a team of designers, how their transition from that has worked and hasn't worked? And
I think the biggest thing I see is designers not thinking like researchers or PMs. It's more just, I have been given this problem space. I need to just create some mock-ups and see what works. But I think there's a lot more that can be done there with designers to make them think like researchers. Like every mock-up you create is actually a hypothesis, etc. And framing your designs that way helps everyone else plug into it. But also getting designers to think more like a PM is, yes, that research stuff, depending on how your organization works. But it also, I would say, helps designers think more about risks. How much of this feature are we going to design and release? So what's the first release versus, what do we actually want to get to? Thinking more iteratively like that is usually helpful.
Yeah, I found it to be, I know I've written about this before, but it always seems like a missed opportunity when I talk with or work with designers that don't have that interest in exploring those spaces, like PM and researchers,
Yeah.
or thinking like that. And again, like as I've said before, I also understand sometimes people are at a point in their career where they just want to make some rectangles. Yeah. Because who doesn't like rectangles? That's what I'm saying.
I mean, I think what they're doing is that's where we get into me thinking about titles and where they've gone. Like I feel like, before there was the term UX UI designer, and then in a lot of agencies they still have like a dedicated UI designer, that gets certain things that have already occurred in the design process handed off to them. That's fine. But I think it's going to hinder their career. They're not going to really be that full spectrum product designer because there's a lot baked into that title, I think. The other thing is, I totally just blanked on what we were talking about. Sorry.
That's okay. It's like about the, and maybe we don't even need to talk about it, but
To make, and I don't, what was it?
hell if I know. We were talking about how, potentially limiting a career it is if you aren't investing or at least interested in thinking like a PM and like a researcher.
Right. And then the other thing is like, if we look at the new technology that came along, AI, that's only going to continue to grow. There's just going to be more types of AI. When things are really data heavy, I feel like designers, their job is always to kind of default to the behavior and start thinking like scientists and think, about creating the hypotheses and bridging that gap between the data and the user. And so I think if you're pigeonholing yourself as a UI designer, really just focusing on the visuals, the interaction, you might find yourself with less job opportunities in the future. I don't want to scare anyone, but I feel like that's kind of the direction we're moving in. And I think for a while, we're going to be in this space of like taking AI and layering it on top of our existing tooling just to have a human in the loop that can work more at scale, right? So if you're like a sales, like an SDR or a BDR, there's already some pretty scary and really good startups out there that are creating products that can write the emails for you, identify leads, send up follow emails, and create that whole funnel. Increasingly, people's jobs are going to be more about controlling, giving, or designers' jobs are going to be more about giving those types of people or users controls to work at scale. So I don't think interfaces are totally going away or anything like that, especially not anytime soon. But I think it's going to benefit designers if they are able to start thinking a bit more about, research, framing hypotheses, focusing on the behavior, and being that bridge in between users and the data.
Yeah. You were saying that, and I was thinking, especially at companies that have a really robust design system that can be just put together for whatever you need,
Yep.
and it's done. Like, if you're at a company that doesn't have that, there's probably a little bit more runway or longevity wise for being there as a screen interface element designer.
Right.
But the more robust these things get, the more commoditized your time becomes, and it can just be replaced.
Right. And then that gets us into a whole other topic of our design systems, hurting designers' ability to do visual and interaction design, because some design systems are so good, or at least internally people perceive them as so good, and then no one questions it, right? They just take the different elements, the components, they put them in place, but they never consider the larger context. What's the user trying to do here? And thinking about how some of these components need to be refined or even just rethought completely. And I'm seeing a lot of that too, where it's people take the design system at face value and they just assume that it's working, it's great. Let's not contribute to it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I thought that was the whole point of the design system.
Right?
Set it and forget it, right? You're saying it's like a living thing that needs to be managed and governed over time? What? That doesn't make sense.
Like on Twitter, I think I saw a tweet the other day. Someone was like tweeting at the design community, trying to seek advice, saying, should I create a design system before I've worked in the problem space, creating solutions, or should I do it after and let things evolve? And I was like, holy cow, that's a question that exists right now. Of course, It's the latter, right? You gotta.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
I mean, to be fair, like any time that I start off a new website or even a deck or something like that, pick your font and color. I mean, forget the content, obviously. Right? Like, I gotta figure out what it's going to look like. That never gets me in trouble.
That's so funny.
When it's my own stuff, I can do it.
Yeah, that's so funny though. It is like it's still some of the things you learn, in school as a graphic designer are still very applicable to how you think of like design systems and building things at scale, right? Because you don't pick, the form before you understand the function. It's like you were saying, you don't pick your. I mean, it's fun to pick your fonts and font sizes up front, but then you find out on page 10 of your slide deck, oh shoot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This needs to be a 5-point font to fit all this stuff on here. Oh, okay. Yeah, and I get it because part of the, and I know the reason that I do this is because a lot of times it's the easiest thing to control that makes me feel like I'm making progress.
Yeah, that's a big thing. That kind of relates. And that relates back to our earlier discussion about, designers trying to influence stakeholders and creating alignment. Everyone wants to just look like they're making progress. And the only way to look like that is to do very tangible things like create mock-ups or even build and ship something. So that's a crazy behavior. That's really tough to combat.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's again, it comes down to fear, right? I'm afraid someone's going to see what I'm doing and think it's not work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas it is work to go and talk to a subject matter expert or a customer or the CEO and say, what's going on? What are you trying to do?
Yeah.
Explain this again. I don't understand. I guess what I'm saying is sometimes meetings are okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But not on Friday. Damn it. We're recording on Friday.
Is that what this is? Shoot, it's a meeting.
Yeah. Yes, it is a meeting. It has an agenda. It has attendees. It had a calendar invite. It's a real meeting. Terrible. Okay. So one of the things when we were talking before we started talking today that you brought up was, and I think the segue here is like designers' careers and how they progress.
Yep.
But part of that progression is, looking for new jobs and finding opportunities for more experience. And you had mentioned about, I think you put it, interview questions that really grind my gears.
Yeah. So I feel like it's the most popular critical and gotcha question designers get asked is, tell me about a time you disagreed with an approach or something like that. And I think the question is even more specific than that I'm trying to reference, but it was essentially like I had to give an example of a time where design was brought in the 11th hour, and I actually slowed things down and connected it to a business goal and said, hey, we actually have to do X, Y, and Z because it's connected to this business goal. Here's why it's connected to the actual design. Let's slow this down. And it actually worked. But then in the interview, they asked me, what would you have done if nobody listened to you? And I said, well, I probably would have gotten the stakeholders together and made sure we were all aligned on what the business goals were, et cetera. And then ask if, it would be okay if we raise this question to their leaders, right? Collectively. So I'm not just like going around them, but we're kind of a united front. And then the interviewer asked me, well, what if you couldn't do that? What if no one at the company wanted to do the right thing? And to that, I kind of I know what they're expecting. They're expecting me to be this grandstander of design and stand on a soapbox and say, we will not ship this thing, etc. But it's totally unrealistic. And I think the most realistic thing you can do in that situation is think iteratively. So think about where do we need to get to, but what's the smallest thing we can ship right now because we're on this tight deadline that sets us in that direction, and outline that for everyone. And I think that's the thing to do. And I gave that answer. They said, so you would do no harm. And I was like, I guess, but really what I'm doing is I'm prioritizing the user here, because if I throw my arms up and kind of grandstand and say, we're not shipping this, they're just going to go around me and they're going to ship something that is crazier. And so it's really in service of the user. And I think that's the best way to handle that situation, because realistically, the other stakeholders are going to just come up with something and ship it, connecting this back to our earlier discussion about behaviors and wanting to feel like you're making progress. And do something tangible. That's what they're going to do. So I've always felt like, well, why don't I just at least outline the vision and ship the smallest thing that sets us in the right direction? So at least we're taking a step in the right direction. But yeah, I've those gotcha questions. Can we stop asking them?
Yeah.
It'd be great.
Yeah. Because obviously, I mean, your answer is fine. But the real right answer is, of course, to quit on the spot.
Yeah, exactly. Or grandstand and say, we will not ship this. But they're just gonna go around you.
No one's gonna listen to you.
They're just gonna go around you and make a bigger mess.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even if you're the VP of design or even SVP of design,
right.
Chief design officer, they still might not listen to you.
Exactly.
Because in some companies, that's how design fits in culturally. Some of these questions, and I get it. It's like we want to come up with this hypothetical, or maybe if you have a real example where you're under a lot of stress and we want to see what you do. And it's like, the assumption is always you're completely on your own.
Right.
Right. And I'm thinking, maybe someone's interviewing at a company that has a design group in it already. Like, you're not going to be on your own in that stuff,
Right.
or in it, to have to deal with that stuff.
But even
And so it's go ahead.
but even then, it's like I think they're expecting you to you could say you'll go to your design leadership and get them involved, but then that just tells them when things get tough, you go to mommy and daddy, right? So it's like
Right.
you can't win.
But people who think that are wrong.
Right.
The right thing to do is to get as many people as possible aligned toward helping the user and use that momentum, that pressure, that social pressure to block or redirect the energy that's trying to get out the door that is potentially harmful to the user.
Yep.
And so it's like, I get you. I get some of these questions, and and I've had the experience where one of the C-level people said, we just don't care about design. And I'm like, I can't do anything with that. Like, as a mid-level designer at the time, I'm not going to spend years building up social capital within a company enough to get a company to start caring about design, especially when the company is already 20, 25 years old.
Yeah.
It is, for me, the right decision to say, I'm going to help as much as I can, but I'm going to go find another job. Because why would I give my energy to someone who truly doesn't give a shit versus people who just aren't thinking in those terms yet? Like, I make a distinction there, but I've run, I don't know if I'm lucky or if it's normal or if I'm unlucky. I just run into a lot of the, we literally don't give a shit. And those interview questions, I've gotten them too, and it's like, what do you do?
Right. And to me, it was like, hearing their response to my answer, I was like, oh, I just found out a lot about how you think about how that should operate and a little bit about your organization. So it was interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of the interview process is you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So it's good to find this stuff out. What's a better question to ask? What do you think?
I think it's more, it might be more about the follow-ups. I think it's an okay question to ask, but the follow-up questions are really indicative sometimes of them wanting you to be some superhero, right? Like those follow-ups that I got about every answer I gave was perfectly fine, but it wasn't good enough, and they wanted to keep creating hypotheticals. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know that this it's realistic still, but the expectation, I can tell what they're trying to, the answer they're looking for, and I'm like, I'm just not going to give it because it's not realistic. So.
Yeah, and I'm not that kind of employee. Well, I guess I am a little bit. I've been known to grandstand before. It's happened once or twice.
But I mean, it's and what happened in those scenarios then is the thing. Did they go around you and ship something that were pretty janky?
Yeah.
So who won?
Yeah.
Ultimately, the user lost, the customer lost, right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah. But then it goes out and they spend $50 million trying to build this new service, and they don't listen to me, but they listen to, I think it was McKinsey. They went out and hired McKinsey instead of me. McKinsey was doing some other things for them too, but McKinsey was like, oh yeah, it's great, everyone's gonna love it, yeah, it's amazing. And no one wanted it. And I was like, told you. But does the CEO doesn't take a hit for it, It's just like, well, this didn't work out because of this flaw. All right, moving on. And I don't know how to do it in such a way that you can do anything but harm reduction while you're on your way out.
Right.
So
Tough one.
yeah, I mean, I think it really just depends on how much the other people really want to improve things
Mm-hmm.
and really care about the customer, care about the user.
Yeah.
So, it's been small things where there's just been like stuff on the screen that was like placeholder imagery in the mock-ups that got built into what went out with the app.
Yep.
And I was like, we need to remove that. And the team was like, no, we'll leave it in because, we don't have a reason to take it out. And
Right.
I'm like, but it's dumb.
Right. And that goes back to,
it's like,
they wanted to leave it in because they wanted to show progress, right? They wanted to ship something tangible. Right. They forgot what the actual stake was.
Yes.
There it is. Full circle.
Yes. If you've been doing the drinking game during this episode, you should have taken a drink on steak.
There you go.
All right. So I guess what we're saying is we don't know what to do other than try and help and hope for the best. See or no?
See.
Okay, good. Solved it again, Patrick.
Yeah.
Solved it again.
We beat the internet.
All right, so I'm asking people questions. I'm calling it my 7 plus or minus 2 questions.
Okay.
Because it makes me laugh. And the first question can be what we just talked about or something else, but what's one thing that you would change about your profession?
Whoa, that's tough. I don't want to say something super cheesy in mainstream to say, oh, just give us more of a seat at the table so that these scenarios we're talking about don't happen. But that comes with a certain amount of responsibility that I think a lot of people don't know that they're asking for when they say, give us a seat at the table. But some way to better respond to those incidences that we were just talking about. We have to stop this thing from leaving the station or whatever it is. I think that's a big one for sure.
Yeah. I feel like potentially from an interviewing perspective, I guess it depends on what the rapport is you have with the person who's interviewing you, but is to come back with a question instead of an answer. Is like, tell me about a time that it's happened in your company.
Right.
And what happened there. What are your expectations of somebody?
Yep.
Not to get around answering, but I kind of, like I said, you're interviewing them as much as they are you, but really like push it back on them and say in the nice way of, what's the purpose of your question?
Right.
What do you really want to know?
Right. And maybe you can,
because
maybe you can offer a tidbit up first of, a story and then say, I'll tell you about this briefly, but I also want to know about why you're asking that question. Just so you don't come off as combative, right? So you exchange some information.
I guess.
Principle of reciprocity, whatever it is.
Just take the politician way of just answer the question you want to answer versus the one you're asked. Just try it out, people. Yeah. Just try it out. All right, next question. What's one thing you wish more people cared about?
Oh.
And no constraint about what this relates to.
So it doesn't have to be design related?
Mm-mm.
Oh, man. That's an easy one for me.
It can be, but...
That's an easy one for me. Food and nutrition and the stuff that's in our food. That's a big one for me.
Like stuff in our food of stuff that shouldn't be, or
Yeah, exactly. Like basically boycott the middle aisles of the grocery store. Just shop on the perimeters. So because there's not, there's instances of in some countries, some of the things we put in our food is totally banned. They recognize it as not fit for human consumption. So,
sure is tasty though. Thanks to that added sugar.
There you go.
Next up, what accomplishment are you most proud of that you didn't get paid to do?
Oh, wow. Oh, that is tough.
Is it tough because you're always about the money? I hear
Yeah.
you. I hear you. That's me too.
Exactly. Let's see. What accomplishment am I most proud of? Didn't involve money. Well, since my mind's already there, with the first question, being able to not necessarily cure, but drastically improve some of my health conditions with just watching what you eat and reading labels, but also doing your research about where's this piece of beef coming from that I'm eating, all that kind of stuff. It has a huge impact. It takes a while to have that impact because everyone's just looking for the quick fix, but if you're actually disciplined and you do it, it pays off. So I think just having the discipline to carry all that through and do all the research, and that was a big accomplishment for me.
Cool. All right, next one, most important, so I'm putting it in the middle.
Okay.
And it's food related.
Yep, here we go.
So here we go. No salsa, mild salsa, or spicy salsa.
Oh, man. I'm going to go mild salsa. The old me would have gone spicy salsa. There's nothing wrong with spicy salsa. It just doesn't agree with me anymore. But
yeah,
I love the taste, but I'm going to have to go mild salsa.
Make your own or?
Been a while since I made salsa. So probably not make my own. Just read the label.
Guest number 3 on the show is a make your own salsa.
Wow.
So. No, I'm asking. Yes. I don't know.
All right. So lessons learned from earlier. Matthew, why are you asking me that question?
The real reason I'm asking it is because I needed 9 questions to get my 7 plus or minus 2. And also it's when I'm feeling a bit down, sometimes I will watch bits from the Craig Ferguson time on the Late Late Show on YouTube. And there's this one thing about salsa that just everyone loses it. And it's basically like, I don't care for salsa, but when I do, spicy.
Okay.
And it just makes me laugh. So I put this in here as sort of an homage.
There you go. My go-to is watching bloopers of The Office when I'm looking for some good YouTube rabbit holes.
So the next question is, what's your favorite place on Earth?
Whoa. Favorite place on Earth? I would say just camping somewhere. That'd be awesome. It's been a very long time for me, but it just makes me feel happy thinking about it. But realistically, what is an actual place that's in my life that I regularly visit? I'm going to go with Wegmans, the grocery store. I'm going to be a weirdo.
There's no wrong answer to any of these. So relative to what first comes to mind when I ask you this, what do you wish you'd done differently?
Oh, this isn't going to be good. I'm going to say... So I've always had an interest in kinesiology. Is that how you say it? Like movement human body,
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
as well as physical therapy stuff. So if I could go back and do it all over again, I might do that. But maybe someday I can find a product design job that kind of marries those two things, hopefully. So if you're out there, any company
Okay.
that's hiring for something like that,
Hire
yeah,
Patrick.
I'm in.
No. Which is funny because the next question, what would you do for a living if you left what you're doing now?
There you go. That's what I do.
You already answered it.
But I think,
Yeah.
the two professions are technically similar when you boil it down. You're just trying to help people, right? It's just
Mhm.
one's a lot more hands-on, face-to-face. The other's through a rectangle. So I think I'd just like to remove the rectangle.
Rectangle reduction system activate. Okay, so last question. Imagine it's a year from now. What do you hope to not be carrying anymore?
Carrying. Like,
However you interpret that.
carrying. Let's go with, I've got some cartilage damage in my knee that we're just slowly rehabbing. It takes years to rehab that because you can't, you know,
Tell me about it.
anger the cartilage while you're strengthening it, which is damn near impossible. But I'd like that to be in a better spot so I can feel like I can do more sports or close to things like that. Like I can golf, but that's about it right now. So that's a big one. I'd like to not carry around. I don't know how you would phrase that.
It doesn't have to be elegant.
Yeah, the weight of having to rehab it or get it to a point where it's more useful. So,
what sport would you introduce?
that's tough. I don't know. Like, I'll never get back to playing soccer. That's gone because that's like way too demanding on it. I think maybe something like pickleball or I don't know. Maybe tennis. I don't know if I could go that far because that's going to be pretty demanding as well on it. But something on that pickleball level.
Yeah. So soccer ruined your knees too?
Pretty much. It was that and weightlifting and being told it was tendonitis for years, and then it wasn't.
Walk it off.
Wasn't tendonitis. So
yeah. The way I phrase it is, I had old man knees when I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
And they still are not. I'm not 16 anymore, so they still haven't really recovered.
Did you play soccer?
So,
nice. What position?
Almost always some defense position. So it was. I played a lot when I was a kid, and this probably hurt. Probably part of the reason was because it was Alaska, and the season is very short there, so it's really intense.
Right.
And put on top of that, the sun's up all the time, and so you can be playing Ultimate at 1 a.m. and still see the disc pretty easily.
Right.
Riding your bike to and fro, all these things, like having my knees kicked multiple times. One time, my knee, goalpost, foot, knee, ow.
That'll happen.
So it's just by the time I was in my mid-teens, it was just my knees were kind of done, so I had to stop playing.
So what I got from that is you lived in Alaska? When?
Good 20 some odd years. I think a total of about 23 years or so.
Yeah.
But I was born there, so
I didn't know that.
What choice did I have? A lot of ways, so yeah. Yep, summers were fun. Winters, I've had enough snow.
Yeah.
So that's why I live in Oregon, I guess, because it doesn't really... When it does snow, it lasts for a week usually, maybe 2, and then it's done. So
Gotcha.
usually. But well, anyway. All right, man. Thank you.
That's it?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Let's stop talking.
I started using that in my meetings with people. I say,
The let's stop talking.
yeah, because I go, well, everyone knows, uh, there hasn't been that much turnover. So people still know you and who you are. And I was just like, I'm going to do what Matthew used to do. I'm going to say, let's stop talking. Go away.
Yeah. Just go away. Yeah. Sometimes meetings don't know how to end. So it's just like, this has moved beyond my ability to pay attention. Please leave.